Hi, I'm Greta. This is my new YouTube channel where I'll be talking about art, the art community, maybe post some tutorials, some art history, just things like that. And the first thing I'm going to talk about today is art policing. Disclaimer, I don't have a proper room to record or anything like that, so I'm sorry if you hear any background noises. This is just the best I can do at the moment. Now, I think there's different types of art policing, so I'm going to try and tackle as many of them as possible, and I'm going to start with art style. When it comes to art style, I want to start off by saying that there's a fine line between what's just a style and what is bad anatomy practice. There's knowing the rules and then bending them to fit your style, and if I were to ask you to draw anything other than that, and you wouldn't be able to. I think one of the biggest giveaways to tell the difference is consistency. For example, if you look at the art style of, say, Fairly Odd Parents, of course none of it is anatomically accurate, but it's consistent. Every part of the character's body is stretched and exaggerated so it doesn't look out of place. So not only is a character's ear on their neck, but they would have like a stiff posture or their head would be much larger than their body. They would just have some kind of distinguishable style. It's the same with a lot of anime styles. So even though a lot of men in anime tend to have elongated limbs and women have crazy hair colors and huge eyes and huge other things, it's still all in the realm of consistency and proportion. So you won't have characters who look like this or like this. Most of the time when I see things like that, it's just examples of bad anatomy. That being said, assuming that someone already knows the rules and is bending them to fit their art style, it's no one's right to tell them that what they're doing is wrong. What we consider aesthetically pleasing is subjective. So it's very irritating to me when I see someone just doing their thing, drawing characters how they want, and maybe they'll give them like bigger noses or a stubbier body, they'll give them like 4 fingers instead of 5, whatever, and people will be like, no, that's wrong. It's not accurate. It's automatically bad. Like, it kind of reminds me of traditionalism, like when during the Renaissance when people were trying so hard to get away from the Middle Ages that pretty much they said that anything that wasn't super realistic was just bad. The second thing is quality. So as I mentioned before, there's definitely cases of people who are just drawing bad anatomy. That being said, those people shouldn't be demonized. And I see a lot of people on the internet looking at people who maybe their work isn't the best, or it's not the most polished, or it's not like accurate, and saying things like, stop drawing, you suck, get off the internet. And I think people forget, or they just don't care, that most of the time when you see someone whose art isn't as good, it's mostly drawn by children or someone in their early teens. Now, I was born in 2003, so not super early Gen Z, but like on the earlier side. And I got into art at a very early age, and I was on the internet very early, and I didn't have that much supervision. And I was very much into things like Five Nights at Freddy's, Sonic, My Little Pony, Creepypasta, Hetalia, oh my god, by no later than age 10, maybe 12, and my art was horrid. It was embarrassing. I cringed so hard my soul wants to leave my body every time I look at my own art. But I remember that I was very young, and these artists are the same. Even though we're born in the same generation, the difference in technological influence and like social media, things like that, is changing rapidly from year to year. So the way that kids even 3 years younger than me showcase their art can be very different to how I did. People my age and a bit older often posted their art on Tumblr and DeviantArt, and that's primarily where I got a lot of influence for my art. But I see a lot of younger kids like starting YouTube channels and posting animation memes when they're like 10 years old. And their art is, at a 10-year-old's level. And I see them being bullied and put into those god-awful cringe compilations that were like everywhere in 2016. And they're just being relentlessly made fun of and just being told their art is horrible. And I think the only difference between me and them is where the internet was at the time and how acceptable it was to be posting your art at that age. I mean, I had a lot of access to the internet, but I still wouldn't have gone as far as to like post it, mostly because my parents said no. And looking back, I'm kind of grateful about that, because seeing how kids are treated on the internet today. I mean, if my 10-year-old self had a YouTube channel and was posting my art at the quality it was at the time and was being treated the same way kids nowadays are treated with their art, I would have been discouraged from drawing forever. I mean, I used to take it to heart every time one of my classmates didn't like my art, let alone if people older than me on the internet who I didn't know were putting me into cringe compilations and talking about how cringe and edgy my art was. Because keep in mind, I made a lot of creepypasta art, and you know how edgy that gets. I'm kind of sick of just seeing how young kids who are in their stages of improvement are treated like they can't make a mistake by people older than them who should know that when they were that age, their art probably wasn't as good, or it was probably worse. And I think it's unfair, and I don't think we're giving young artists enough time to better themselves before they're so harshly critiqued. I think it's better than it was like 4 years ago, but now that like cancel culture is kind of a thing, I feel like when younger artists start making bigger mistakes, like things which would be considered controversial, and they need time to sit down and understand why that's bad. Like, I'm stretching here, but you know how kids draw Asian characters and their eyes are just like lines? Again, I'm like stretching here, I'm just using this as an example. I feel like if someone isn't aware that that's a kid, someone is going to jump on them for that. And I don't think that kids are really ready to, I mean, even adults find it hard to deal with that kind of criticism, let alone kids. And I don't think they're gonna have someone to sit them down and tell them in like an educational way why that's wrong and why that's offensive. They're just gonna have people berating them and calling them all kinds of horrible things. And it's just gonna deter young artists from improving, ever. Next is content. Now I feel like this is a fairly new one, but I see people policing what people are allowed to depict in their art. And I think this is partly because of people's need to be woke, and I'm gonna explain this one. I'm of the belief that as long as no one has like a hidden agenda as to why they're drawing a certain way or what they're drawing, everyone is allowed to do what they want, and they shouldn't be facing backlash because of it. Now, something I've noticed is people tend to draw things that they're most familiar with, right? So when you start out drawing, you tend to draw the default because that's what you see mostly. Like, you draw thinner people because when you're learning art or in art class and they teach you human figures, that's what they teach you. They rarely teach you to draw someone overweight or underweight or anything like that. Even when it comes to people of color, there's not that much representation, unfortunately, in media, in art and things like that. So when you're looking for references, most of the time you'll find white people. A number of black artists have come out saying like, hey, I mean, I'm black and I didn't know how to draw black people. Like, I had to teach myself to draw black people because all I saw growing up was white people. It's shitty that that's the case, and it's a good thing that that's changing, but at the moment that's the reality of it. It's even more so the case if your first reference for drawing isn't even real life, if it's like a cartoon or something. That's how mine was. A lot of the characters I used to draw kind of was a mix of styles of whatever shows I was watching, and there wasn't that much diversity within my characters. Even like, they had similar faces, they had like same face syndrome. Now, none of the reasons that I mentioned have anything to do with prejudice, or at least not conscious prejudice. Keyword there. And I think as long as someone doesn't have an intentional bias, they shouldn't really be called out or heavily criticized for that. Because there's nothing, I mean, at the end of the day, they're not a big corporation. They're not some big organization that's the whole point is representation, that is trying to cater to a lot of people. They're an individual artist. It depends on whether they're making it their brand to be diverse, and if not, I mean, that's up to them. Like, if you don't like that, just don't commission the artist or don't watch it. Granted that it's not intentional, I don't think they're hurting anyone, because then you have people like Antunes, who their entire platform is just dedicated to racist, transphobic, homophobic, pretty much anything phobic art. And that is a huge problem because it's actually hurting people. But I think critiquing someone's art and the content of it becomes a bit more iffy if, say, they're drawing people from real life that they know. If someone only draws their friends and they all happen to be thin, you can't come at them and call them fat phobic for that, because maybe just none of the people they know or none of the people they're friends with are plus size. Or if someone's drawing like something that's from a particular time period, say it's set in like Morocco in 1612, you can't get angry at someone for not drawing Eurocentric features because that just wouldn't make sense historically. And ironically, what I find hilarious is when a lot of people try to diversify their art for the sake of being unproblematic, but bash other people for supposedly being all those things, the representations tend to be more harmful than just not drawing them at all. For example, there's been countless instances where black characters have been drawn with offensively stereotypical features. Trans characters have had their features exaggerated almost grotesquely sexualized, and plus size characters being exaggerated as well. All in the name of this is unconventionally attractive. And this just backfires because it just seems like tokenism. You're drawing these characters not because you want to draw them, but because for the sake of being diverse. It just comes off as very performative. And what a lot of people do, which I find quite irritating, is they bash other people's art, but they'll also take other people's characters and fix them. Like, what does that even mean? Because let's face it, people fix other characters because they see something wrong with it. They see something problematic. And to me, it's kind of plagiarism. Because most of the time, what they'll do is they'll straight up rip off another person's character, redesign them, give them a new backstory, sort of like a headcanon, you know, and then claim it as their own. Or say that they've somehow made that character better because it's not problematic anymore in their eyes. I mean, don't you think that it would just be better to give criticism to the artist and tell them what's problematic about their character? You know, obviously assuming that the character has been drawn in a way that's actually offensive, and assuming you have a better reason to criticize it than you just don't like it, or you think it could have been done better. The last type of art policing I'll be talking about is attractiveness. This ties kind of into content policing, but I feel like this is so specific that it's its own issue. So you see a lot of artists talking about how we need to draw people which are more unconventionally attractive. Fair enough, that's great. But this leads to artists bashing other artists whenever they draw something that's considered conventionally attractive, pretty much trying to say that they are discriminating if they just draw that. Again, that just might be what they're more familiar with, assuming that that's the case and they're not doing it intentionally. A lot of them also claim to be against the idea of misogyny and the patriarchy, which, fair enough, but they want to desexualize characters that they feel like are too sexualized. But you know, where do we draw the line? You see, the problem is a lot of characters that people desexualize come from sexual sources, like hentai. You know, the characters are meant to be sexual, they're meant to be sexualized. That's the thing about that kind of industry. Think of Rule 34. If it exists, there's porn of it. That means anything can be sexualized, and here's my problem. Traditionally, when people take a character and attempt to make it less sexy, why does that more often than not include shrinking their chest size, making them overweight, even changing their race? Why do those things have to be associated with being less sexy? Can people with all those things not be sexy? And are you telling women with a larger chest that like their body's vulgar or too sexy, or that by simply existing and having that size, you know, boobs, they are giving into the patriarchy? Why can't all those things just be respected? Why is sexy automatically associated with the patriarchy, and why is it automatically bad? This just does way more harm than good, especially if you're trying to change your character from an industry that doesn't care about diversity at all. All it cares about is making money from getting people off. It just doesn't make any sense. So too long don't read for this entire video. People should be allowed to draw whatever they want unless it's actively promoting hate, intolerance, CP, or anything genuinely harmful. So this was my first proper video, and probably no one's gonna see it, but if you do, leave suggestions as to what I should talk about next. Any feedback I would love to hear. Thank you.